Good morning, good evening, everyone. I hope you had a great day yesterday. There were some amazing talks from the community and the community members like Sam, Dhruti, Saurabh, and Suneet. Today's day will be all about front ends, and I'm really excited because there will be some amazing talks on AMP and my favorite topic, Angular. So, hope you will have a great day today as well. And for today, I have my co MC with me, Vrijraj. How are you, Vrijraj?
Yeah, I'm good. Hello, everyone. I'm Brijraj, organizer of GDG Jalandhar and GDE for Web Technologies and Firebase. Greeting of the day. Yesterday event was full of excitement, and we have some amazing session on performance and developer tools. We have a variety of talks in store for you today. It's going to be technical for sure. Moving forward with the sessions today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker of the day, Hiren. He is a CTO at Abe Tech Solution and co-organizer at GDG Ahmedabad. He will be sharing his knowledge on implementation of AMP website. So without much ado, over to you, Hiren.
Hello everyone, welcome to WebDev Live India Day 2. My name is Hiren. I am working as a Chief Technology Officer and I am the co-organizer of GDG Ahmedabad. Today my session is about amplifying your web applications. This is our session agenda. We will start with introduction to AMP. Then we will see difference between AMP and PWA because this is very important as both the AMP and PWA is meant for performance enhancement. So as a developer, we should know when to use AMP and when to use PWA. The third topic will be demystifying the AMP, where we will see the latest component of the AMP and all the three major component of the AMP. Then we will see how actually you can amplify your web apps, where I will show you how you can build your AMP page from the scratch, as well as how you can convert your existing web application or HTML pages to AMP page. And at the last, we will see some of the AMP component available in the catalog, so you can know when to use which component. Now let's start with the introduction of AMP. AMP, the full form of the AMP is Accelerated Mobile Pages. It is an open source project launched by Google to ensure that mobile web pages operate at the optimal speed. The goals of AMP is to build the future of web together and to build the blazing fast web pages, ads, newsletters, stories, and emails. We will see this in detail in the other AMP session, which is scheduled today. And it is meant for consistent and high performance across all the platforms. It doesn't matter if you are running your website over the web desktop or over the tablet or over the phone. AMP is meant for providing high performance and consistent layout across the platforms. This is what you will get with AMP. You will get a very reduced load time because AMP is using a cache and a lot of other mechanism for loading your web page very faster. You will get a very low bounce rate because your web page is working so smooth and so faster that your users and customers will stay on the page. Let me just quickly introduce quickly tell you what is a bounce rate. Bounce rate is like someone comes to your web application or website and due to high loading time or due to some issues, they just don't visit or don't stay on your website and just leave it like that. But when you convert your application to AMP, it is drastically reducing your load time so that your users will stay on your application. So that will be a low bounce rate. You will get an enhanced ACO because AMP has an inbuilt ACO tags and everything. It is mobile friendly because it has a lot of layouts and because this mobile normally has the low network and we normally face low network issues on the mobile, but because AMP is using cache and all, it is very mobile friendly. And at the last, as we have seen, AMP will give you high performance web pages across all platforms. These web pages are very smooth to load, very fast, and it is using a cache, so it will load like in very fraction of seconds or in fraction of minute. Okay, now we all know that there is PWA already in the market, the progressive web application. It is doing the same thing, that it is creating the high performance web applications. It is creating web applications which loads very fast. It has user engagement and everything. So why should we go for AMP? So here I have created a brief comparison between AMP and PWA. So it is very clear to you when to use AMP and PWA. So let's see this bit of, in the structure first. First, let's see what is AMP. So as we know, it is an open source platform created on JavaScript for faster page loading than the other HTML. On the contrary, PWA, it is a kind of a mobile web that gives you native look and feel with the high performance. What does it have? AMP has a streamlined CSS, standardized JavaScript and components, where PWA is created of service worker, app cell, and app manifest. What does AMP do? AMP reduces your page load time and increases the speed. On the other side, PWA enables the rich user experience and increases the user engagement with features like push notifications. Now, when to use AMP? AMP is particularly suitable when you want to deliver a static content. So static content is like, let's say, your ads or your newsletter, or any other images or any other image gallery or something which is kind of a static content which you want to just deliver to your users. So that's where you should go for AMP. And PWA is best suited for the web apps, and it is recommended for secure HTTP web apps. So as we know that PWA does not work without HTTPS. So HTTPS is very important for web for the PWA. So whenever you want to have a secure web application, you should go for PWA. And the engagement rate for the PWA is higher because it has features like push notifications. So you can interact with user later on as well when your user has gone off from your PWA, but still you can engage with them through push notifications. So that is where user engagement rate is higher compared to AMP. But this will give you a clear-cut idea when to use AMP and when to use PWA. So in a summary, if you want to just deliver the static content and you want to have the high performance website that loads in a fraction of seconds, you should go for AMP. On the other side, when you want to have a native look and feel like web apps and you want to have a high engagement factor for your end user, you should go for PWA. And PWA is secure. PWA is working on the HTTPS, so it is a secure platform. Now let's demystify AMP. Here we will see what is the main component of AMP and what are the main what are the building blocks of the AMP. The first is there are three core components of AMP. One is the AMP HTML, second is AMP JavaScript, and third is AMP cache. Now let's see one by one. First, let us understand what is AMP HTML. So AMP HTML is nothing but just it's HTML tag only, but it has some restriction for better performance. It has AMP specific tags, which is called AMP HTML component. All your existing browser like Google Chrome, it will render it as a normal HTML. And for AMP, there is no specific configurations required on the server. So it is purely on the client side. So AMP HTML is nothing but you can say it's an extension of HTML. And it is just using the same tag like HTML, but it has a specific tags. We will see what are the what all AMP tags are available. So this is what it will look like. So this is what it will look like. The plain AMP page. It begins with HTML. It begins with HTML tag. It has head, it has meta, title, link, but as you can see, the top HTML tag where you can see little lightning symbol. So that specifies that it is the HTML AMP tag. This is the lightning symbol you can use, or you can use HTML AMP as the start tag. So this is the normal AMP tag, and this is the plain and very simple HTML page. Just for your example, we will see in detail what all tags and what all prerequisites are there for creating the AMP page. One second, what is AMP JavaScript? So AMP JavaScript, it ensures the fast rendering of AMP HTML. It makes external resources asynchronous. It provides custom HTML tags for the fast rendering. It disables all the slow CSS selector, and it implements inline CSS and font triggering. Now let's understand it in bit detail. Why it makes everything asynchronous? We all know that when we are using JavaScript heavily in our web application, and if there is some issue with JavaScript, or if there is any error, it stops your execution over there. So that's why AMP JavaScript ensures that all your resources are loading asynchronously, so that if there is an issue, it does not block the loading of your page, but it will still load. In AMP, you can use external JavaScript as well, but you cannot use directly with the normal script tag. There is a specific tag which you have to use. We will see it in detail in later slides. It disables slow CSS selectors, because all we know that CSS can drastically slow down your app performance. So what AMP JavaScript do is that it disables all that slow CSS selector, which can disable your app performance. And it implements inline CSS, because as we all know that if we are using CSS from a third-party page or some third-party script, it will load the CSS, and then it will apply the CSS, and then your layout changes, and it is all very time-consuming activities. So what AMP does is that, so there is a prerequisite for creating the AMP page, which is you have to implement all CSS inline. And it implements the font triggering, because font loading is also a very time consuming operation. If you are using any third-party font in your application, it will load the font, and then accordingly it will adjust the layout and so many things. So that is also a time consuming process. So what AMP JavaScript do is that it implements the inline CSS and the font triggering. And one point which I would like to mention is that AMP JavaScript takes care of the layout as well. So in your application, if your layouts are changing frequently, let's say your browser is resizing or any other thing, at the time it is very difficult for application, because it changes the layout frequently. So all your DOM is re-rendered, and there are a lot of heavy operations involved in that. So what AMP ensures is, it restrict your layout, and it provides rendering in a such a way that your layout changes are not frequent, and that way your application is performing well. So this is all about AMP JavaScript. Now let's see what is AMP cache. As we understood earlier that AMP is using Google Cache, and Google Cache identifies all your AMP pages. So there are validators for the AMP pages, and when Google Cache sees that there is an AMP page, it will cache it, and next time whenever it is required, it will serve the page from the cache and not from the original file. So that way it will drastically increase your web performance, because all of your pages is coming from the cache. So that way it increases the performance. And AMP cache has built-in validations, as we know that it makes sure that your AMP page works. So whenever you are creating an AMP page, you can use this validator to make sure that your page is compliant with all AMP restrictions and everything. If there is some issue, this validator will show an error, and then you can rectify. You can first rectify it, and then you can again validate it, so that you make sure that your AMP page works fine. It is cached, and it can be served over the cache, and then it is loading in very high speed. So this is about AMP cache. Okay, now let's move to the third section, which is actually amplifying your web apps. Here, First of all, we will see if you have to build a new AMP page from the scratch, what exactly you should do. These are the some list I have mentioned over here, which is the must-haves for your AMP HTML page. The first is it should start with doc type HTML. This is very required. If you have not specified this, then validator will give you an error. So that this is the foremost requirement. Second is the top level tag of your HTML should be HTML AMP, so that Google Cache can identify this as an AMP page, and the other content inside that will also be considered as an AMP tag, and it will be rendered particularly. So this is the second most requirement to create an AMP page, that your top level tag should be HTML AMP. It should have head and body tags. In normal HTML, if you don't specify, sometimes don't specify head and body tag, it will work. However, according to the W3 standard, it is not good. But then normally, sometimes when it is skipped, still it will work. But when you are building an AMP page, this is very much required. If you skip head or body tag, it will not work. It will give you an error. The first child of head should be meta char set, which should specify UTF-8 encoding. So again, this is a prerequisite for AMP. The fifth point is you should load AMP.js library from the AMP CDN. So here, as you can see, we have created a script tag and we are loading this library asynchronously. So this is a must-have for creating the AMP HTML page. You should add a link to your non-AMP version of the page or a 4.0 So in case your browser is not supporting the AMP and your user is trying to load your AMP page, it should be redirect to your non-AMP version or a 4.04 page that says that this page is not available in the normal format. It should specify the responsive viewport, and it should have a CSS boilerplate code. So CSS boilerplate code is nothing but a code provided by, this code is available on the amp.dev website where you can find it out. So this is the inline CSS implementation of your AMP application. Boilerplate has certain amount of code comes when you are adding it. The other CSS style which you want to apply, you can add it inside that, but make sure that it should be inline. No external CSS are allowed in your AMP page. Everything should be inline. So these are the must-haves for creating the AMP HTML page. And when you follow all the steps, this is how. The other option for creating the AMP page is you must ensure that your AMP page is discoverable, and this is how we will do it. As we have mentioned that we have to add a link to non-AMP page and an AMP page in your HTML, so that your browser can identify it as an AMP, and if your browser doesn't support AMP, then it should redirect to the non-AMP page. So this is what makes your page discoverable in AMP cache, which is the Google cache, so it can be cached and next time it will be served from the cache. And once you follow all these steps and all the prerequisites for creating the AMP HTML, this is how your AMP page will look like. So as you can see, we have begun the AMP HTML with, we have begun the page with HTML AMP tag. We have head tag. The first tag inside the head is meta, which is specifying the UTF-8 encoding char set. Then we have a title. Then we are providing the canonical link, which specifies the regular HTML version of your page. Then we are specifying the meta viewport. Then we are adding the AMP boilerplate style inside the no script tag, so it is inline. And then we are adding the AMP JavaScript link, and then we have body and closing HTML tag. So this is how your new AMP HTML page will look like when you are creating a new page. Next, okay, as we all know, AMP is something which is new and you want to create it, but what about your existing HTML page? You have your website and now if you have to build it from scratch, so that is again a lot of work. So if you want to convert your HTML page to AMP page, these are the some steps which you have to follow. Step number 1, include AMP.js library inside your head tag. So this is a must have, because if you don't specify this, your AMP HTML will not work, it will not be rendered. Second step, include carousel. Most of the time we have this in website, but still if it's not there, then you can add that. Include the canonical link, of course. As we have said, you have to make your page discoverable. In that case, you have to add this canonical link for your non-AMP page. You have to specify the AMP attribute, because as we know that we normally in web application, we normally start with the HTML tag, and we have to convert it to the AMP HTML tag. Next, we have to specify the viewport. So as we have seen that this is the required parameter for creating the AMP HTML. Next is convert your external style sheet to the inline. So here, this is how you can do that. You can add a style tag and a specify attribute AMP custom. So this is the tag provided by AMP framework for having your inline CSS, and whatever the CSS you have in your external style sheet, you can edit over here inside this tag so that it is rendered inline. Exclude all the third-party JavaScript. If you have any third-party JavaScript, you can comment it out, and still if those third-party JavaScript are required for your page, this is how you can do. You can use the AMP script tag, and inside that you provide your source for your JS file, which is again loaded asynchronously. Inside that script file, if your script is manipulating the DOM or changing the DOM, that DOM element you can specify inside the AMP script. So when it is loaded, it will just affect that particular part of your page. You have to add AMP CSS boilerplate. Okay, this is just an example. In case if you have a lot of images in your AMP in your non-HTML non-AMP HTML page, to convert it to the AMP HTML, you have to replace all your image tag with AMP image, and then just like this, if you have any other non-AMP tag which you would like to convert, you can convert. So we'll see in the AMP catalog what all the tags are available. You can go through it, and then you can just use it according to your requirement. Okay, now here comes the important part of the session. What if you already have existing PWA and you want to leverage the power of AMP inside your progressive web application? Because normally what happens is that whenever we have a progressive web application, it does the same thing. It is normally the single page application, and inside all the HTML page we have some API calls, and that gives you some JSON data, and then we just use that JSON data to render our HTML and all kind of stuff. So if you want to convert your existing PWA and you want to leverage the power of AMP, there are some ways you can do that. So this is the first way, using the AMP as a data source. So when we say data source, that means, okay, so when we say data source, that means in your PWA, whatever the single page application you have, you use AMP to load that HTML, and then you can just reuse it. So let's say in your PWA you have 5 HTML page, and you have a anchor tag. On click of that, you load the other HTML page and display it in your PWA. What you can do is that you can use AMP as a data source. What it does is that it loads your HTML page and it caches that, so that next time when you are loading or when you are clicking on the same link, it will provide it from the cache. So all your HTML will come in as a data, and then you can just re-render it. So for that, these are the steps you have to follow. First is include shadow AMP. So shadow AMP is one of the component available in the AMP framework. This is the link which you can add in your PWA page. Then the second code is to check whether your AMP shadow is ready. So once your AMP shadow is ready, it will be available in your window object, which is window.amp, and then you can use it to render a page. So here what we are doing is that we are using amp.attach_shadow_doc, which is the method of your amp shadow, and we are adding a container, we are specifying a doc, and we are specifying the URL. So what it does is that it will fetch your HTML from that particular URL, and then it will re-render it inside the container. So this is how you can use AMP as a data source for your progressive web application. Another option for integrating AMP to PWA is to preload PWA with the AMP page. So what it does is that it will make AMP HTML as an entry point for your progressive web application. So what it does is it will load first page of your PWA as an AMP page, so that it will be loaded very faster and it will be cached. So next time whenever you are requesting your PWA main page again, it will reload it from the cache, and this is how it will boost up your performance. So for that, what you can do is that, just like the normal service worker of PWA, AMP is also providing you the service worker. So this is how you can use the service worker. This is the script tag which you have to add it in your HTML page, which is AMP install service worker, and it will add the service worker, and then the other tag which is AMP install service worker, which is the component of AMP. Here inside you can specify your service worker. So what it does is that it will install the service worker, and next time when you are requesting any of the page, it will be through that particular request will be through service workers. So the rest of the portion will be done by your service worker. As we know that in service worker we can specify the HTML, JS, CSS images that should be cached. So what it does is that here what we are doing is that we are using AMP service worker to make sure that all your resources, all your progressive web applications resources are cached, and all the request or all the navigation of your web pages are going through the service worker, so that whenever you are requesting a next page, it will be through the service worker as well as through AMP, and this is how you can integrate AMP in your progressive web application. Okay, now let's quickly see some of the AMP component catalog. Here I have mentioned some of the brief or some of the well-known AMP component which are available in the catalog. Full list is available on the amp.dev website. There you can see all kind of AMP component are available in the catalog, and you can use it as and when it is required. So first is for the advertising and analytics. As we have seen that we will see this in the later session for today, how you can create blazing fast ads, newsletters, email by using the AMP. So for that, when you are building it, these are some of the component which you can use, like AMP ad, AMP analytics. If you want to have a sticky ad, AMP pixel, AMP social share. These are the inbuilt component available in the AMP framework, which you can straight away use inside your application for creating the rich user interface. Another one is the dynamic content. So let's say you want to display a list, or you want to add some script, or you want to have some web push notification, user notification, live list. So this is for the dynamic content. These are some popular component available for the dynamic content. Full list, as I mentioned, available on the amp.dev website. There you can see all the kind of catalogs. Third one is the layout. So as we understood that whenever we are creating a web page, or whenever we're creating a web application, the responsiveness is what is required. And for that, there are some default layouts component available in the AMP framework, which is the accordion. You do have the support of iframe, AMP layout, AMP sidebar. So using this, you can nicely create your AMP application, and you can have the layout as per your wish and as per your requirement. Third one is AMP media. So AMP image, as we already seen the previous example when we were mentioning to convert your existing HTML to AMP. AMP image tag you can use. Then we have AMP animation. AMP animation is only using the GPU accelerated animations. Then we have the rich player. that is used for creating the player inside your application, amp video, amp YouTube. So these are the some inbuilt component or tags available with the amp framework for having the media in your application. Then the presentation, you can have some component like amp animation, using which you can do some animations, font, date display, date countdown, time go. There are a lot of such component available for having the presentation in your amp application. Then we have amp component social. So let's say you want to give a Twitter share or Twitter link button, or your amp or your Facebook like or Facebook page or any other social media like Vine, GFI Cat, Instagram. All kind of social media are supported in the amp, and you can use all your tags inside your amp component. Yeah, so that is what pretty much about this session. Hope it is informative for you guys, and now you can start working on start building your amp application, and it is really cool. So try it out, and thank you for watching the session, and hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Amazing talk. I'm sure after this talk, many developers are going to amplify their own websites. And thanks for your time and effort. I can see you have put a lot of contents there. So thank you. Thanks again for joining the session, and see you again for AMA session. And to the listeners, you can ask the question. So please ask questions in chat window. We will share the same questions during AMA with our speakers. And now, time to introduce our next speaker. I'm really a big fan of this guy. So we have Ashok Vishwakarma from Naukri, who will be joining us, and he will be talking about the cleaner React apps using hooks and context APIs. I'm sure if you're from a React background, you are so much excited right now, because I am not. So, but I will learn something new from this session. So let's go ahead and hand it over to Ashok.
Hey, yeah, hello everyone. I hope that you guys are enjoying this whole web.dev live India sessions. And myself, Ashok Vishwakarma. I I work as a principal architect at Naukri, and I happens to be a Google developer expert as well for web categories specifically. In this specific talk, I would like to address some of the new feature which React 16.8 got in terms of hooks and context APIs. And the agenda, actually, the agenda for today is pretty straightforward. I'll just go and introduce a little bit about React, that what React is, and how you can get started with it. Then I'll actually talk about some specific challenges which we face while actually using React in bigger and larger projects. And then I'll move to introducing you to hooks, how they are implemented, and how you can get it started with. And then we'll have some introduction around context, and after that we'll put everything together and see that where and how you can take this into your next project. So first thing first, exactly, what is React? So it's a JavaScript library to build user interfaces, which is pretty much mentioned on their react.org website as well. So in general, what React is, for my understanding, is it gives you some specific features to actually compose your specific HTML layout into certain parts, and those specific parts they call as a component. These are the few specific terminology which we use inside React, which is component. They are the core building blocks of any specific React app. Then they have props. Props are we call those specific properties which we pass actually from one component to another. And every specific React component have a state which is internal state, and they manage that state to re-render and display some specific information and do the change and chain detection and etc. Apart from that, they also have lifecycle methods. These methods are some specific callbacks which we get on certain and various stages of React component lifecycle. So actually, let's talk about a little bit about the component that what type of components we have in React. So one is a function component. If you see this example, this is a very simple counter component, and it's a pure function component. It can only receive information through props. So I have count and set count, which is coming from the parent component, and then using that, I'm just displaying the count and there's a one callback to set count to either increment it or to decrement it. The properties of a function component is they also called a stateless component, and as I mentioned earlier, that the parent can only pass the data using props. They do not have any specific state, and they don't own it at all, and they also don't support any lifecycle methods. So you can call they are pure functions which just return JSX and receive some information through props which we can display inside that specific JSX. Similarly, we have class component, but these components are pretty different than the function components. And here is an example of the same counter into a class component. You see that now instead of creating a function counter, I'm creating a class counter, and that particular class is extended using React component. You can also use pure component as well. That's also class component. And then you can see that I'm also defining a state, which is count, and I'm setting the initial value of count to 1. And then I've declared two specific methods. One is a plus and one is minus. And these two methods, what I'm doing is I'm just incrementing and decrementing the state value of that count. And in the render, I'm using the same JSX which I was using earlier. And rather than taking the values and information from the props, I'm using those values from the props from the state directly. And these specific two methods which I binded and I'm using on especially as a handlers. So especially in class components, what you see is they extend React.component or React.pure component, similar to function component. Actually, class component can also receive information from their parent, and they have their own state, and they also support lifecycle methods, which will look into that. So it's good that we use React and we build lots of projects around that, but there are certain challenges which I like to address, which we face in especially in React when actually working on some specific big projects and large scale applications. So first challenge which I face is very common is reusing logic. So components are the basic building blocks of React apps, and they have two ways to share stateful logic between components, and those specific methods are high order components and render props, which are great for few specific cases, but they also have some specific downside. If you need to use any of these specific methodology in your specific component, you need to restructure in a component in a way that you can support this particular features over there. For example, if you're using a function component, you have to create a class component, and then you also have to restructure your specific component into parent and child system, so that parent can send the information, and that parent is also called the high order components over there. Render props is something where you can send the information through your props and stuff like that. So this specific restructuring actually leads to one specific problem, which is called wrapper hell. The wrapper hell is this whole specific nesting of your React application, which you end up having because of those specific changes which you have made to actually avail either render props or high order components. If you look at this particular screenshot, uh, you can understand that it would be really difficult to follow the data flow throughout this component tree. And it would be really nice if there would be some specific way to share this spaceful logic without needing to restructuring this component into this specific way. The next problem which I would like to talk about is actually giant components. So when you build a large application in React, you end up having very big and giant components. And the problem with these components are because the life uh, actually the life cycle methods are designed in a way that you have to spread your logic around those specific methods, and they become very cumbersome time to time. So let's take a look an example and see what I'm trying to say here. So first thing is, like, if you have one specific class component which you can see here, and you have one specific lifecycle method which is called component did mount. What component did mount do is it just fires up when your component is actually mounted into your viewport. And and in this particular method, what I'm actually doing is I'm doing three things. One is I'm subscribing to a store to get some information. I'm making a network call to get some additional information about that particular item, and I'm also starting a timer at the same time. The next component method is which I'm using is which is called component will unmount. This gets fired when your component is leaving your view. I mean, it's removing completely from your current page. And inside that, I'm also doing the exactly same things, but opposite to what I was doing in component did mount. Uh, I'm unsubscribing. Actually, I'm unsubscribing the subscription which I've created to the store. I'm also canceling any specific pending request which I have, and I'm also stopping the timer which I've started. Similarly, if we also consider component did update, then this whole thing going to be a little more messy, because in this particular method you have to compare from previous props to next props and then do your specific logic around that. So if you check this particular example, what exactly happens is, because logic is spread through these specific lifecycle methods, and it's very hard to follow if this component is pretty giant. Like this specific scenario, I'm just doing these three specific things, but in more real life examples, this case is going to be a little more complex. And most of the time, what happens is, when you look at those specific components, you don't understand what exactly is going on, because you have to scan through all of the component lifecycle methods to understand what exactly that component is doing, and that is going to be a little bit hard to understand at the first. And the second thing, it's also going to lose some of those specific edge cases where you end up making mistakes, and ends to leak which ends to have some memory leaks in your application. For example, if I subscribe to a store or maybe started a timer, but if I don't follow the code properly, I might actually forget to do any unsubscription or stopping the timer which I've started. And in that case, my timer will be keep running, and I'll actually end up having some specific memory leaks over there. The other problem which I also see in React specific is, because classes are the only way as of now which you can achieve life cycle methods or maybe stateful logic. And classes have certain specific challenges of their own. Like, these classes in JavaScript are a little tricky, because you have to understand how this works, how binding works if you are making an object out of it and stuff like that. And classes also add fair amount of boilerplate into your code, like that constructor syntax, and then that this and and specifically those binding in Reacts, because we have to bind every method so that it can work inside a callback or as a callback specifically. Apart from that, I've also seen that developers who use React have some fear about functional component, because they don't know when they needed to be using state or maybe lifecycle hooks. So it's very difficult to decide whether I should go for a component, a function component or a class component, because because there always going to be a specific fear in your mind that later on I might needed these state and lifecycle hooks inside that component, and I have to convert this particular function component into a class component. So should I do it right now, or I should be doing at the time of when I'll be needing that? So specifically, that particular confusing with classes is actually there. And classes is also a little hard for machines as well. Like if you see minified version of your specific class, you see that methods and properties are not minified, because they can be used runtime and other specification to that. And unused methods and unused properties also don't get stripped out, because there's always going to be a chance to get them used actually from the object. And implementing a reliable hot reloading in case of React when using classes is also a little challenging, and that they mention in various places in the documentation as well. And with the classes, they also have a little bit challenge on compile time optimization of your whole React application. So these are the three specific problems which we have talked so far, and I think these problems are because there is no simpler way which we can use to manage state inside a class, inside a function component, and the only way which we have is using class component. So to solve that problem, in React 16.8, they have introduced hooks. So what hooks are typically that let you use state and other React features without writing a class, and they also provide some sort of and they also provide a way to share logic among these specific components, specifically stateful logic, so that you don't have to restructure your code and you end up having wrapper hell specifically over there. So let's take the same example which we have created, which you have seen on the function component example. In this particular example, what you see is like I'm just using this count and the set count method, but I don't know where I should be getting from. So in React hook, what we have here is we have a use state method exported inside the React package, and that use state method returns you an array, and that array contains a specific variable which contains the value which you initially set to that, and there is one specific method by which you can set the new value to that particular variable, and this is a stateful value. So if you see this particular syntax, now the count and set count is going to be reside in this particular component only, and they're going to affect only this particular component. Similarly, how the set state works in class component. And if you want to declare multiple variables and multiple state to your specific component, what you can do is you can just call this use state method multiple times. Few things to note here. One is it returns a stateful value and a function to update that value. It's render on each update call. I mean, each time you call set age, set fruit, or set to dos, it's actually going to be re-render the whole. It's actually going to re-render the whole component itself. And unlike the set state method in classes, in this use state, you don't get your state values merged, which means like if you if you try to do something which is like an array or an object, and you assume that if I already have some values on that particular object, and I'm just adding the new one, you won't get the older one. You won't get the older values, because it's going to replace the value which you're going to pretty much call on next update. Uh, Another hook in React is called use effect. So what use effect does is it lets you use those specific lifecycle methods inside your React function component. So a lifecycle method, it can be either component in mount or component will unmount, and there are certain other lifecycle methods as well. So this use effect state, it actually takes a specific callback, and that callback get called every time your component re-renders. And if you see this particular example, what I'm doing here is every time I'm updating my count, I also wanted to update my document title so that my count values gets reflected on my document title as well. And in this example, every time I click that button, it's going to do two things. It's going to actually update the state which I'm using set count to, and then it's also going and then it's come to the effect section, and in that effect section, it's going to use that document the title syntax, and by which it's going to update the document title with the updated count. Similarly, there are some specific cases where you also want to clean up after your effect. So every effect can also return an optional function, and that function get calls when your component is unmounted, like if when actually going to remove from your current page. And there is a second optional parameter to the use effect method as well, which is kind of your component date update thing, in which you have previous props and next props, and based on that you do some specific diffing, and based on that diffing you render or not render your specific component. So in this particular scenario, React gonna do that particular diff at their own, and you just have to pass that what sort of properties you care about and what sort of property changes you want this component to re-render. So in here, in this example, what I'm doing is I'm just making a call to API to get the initial count, and then setting that count to the count value, and also returning a method which gonna cancel any specific pending request which I have. And I'm also making sure that my effect only runs when my props.change is changed. So in this, as in effects, it's accept a function, it's fire on mount and update by default, a cleanup called on unmount, and conditioning firing based on that particular second argument which we have. The another hook which we have is called use context. So context is also get introduced recently in the React, and I'll have a complete introduction of context later. But in this example, what we are trying to do is we are trying to use a theme context inside a function component. And if you see that I'm just using use context method and passing the context inside that, I'm getting a theme variable, and that I'm directly using as in a object from a style property. So so in the code, how this particular context going to look like is going to have some certain theme and some specific object like style sheet objects, and that I'm using directly to style my specific component. And the way use context works is accepted context object, which you can create by using create context, and it return the current context value. So context are pretty much like a pub/sub model inside the React, which we'll talk in the context section. And it's also attached the nearest context provider. So if you have a hierarchy of component and you have multiple provider in your application, the first the nearest parent which gonna have that particular context provider, that is going to attach to, and it's re-renders every time that context value get changed. Another way of using state inside a component is through reducer. Reducer is a new specific hook, and it's pretty similar to actually use state. But the only difference is instead of instead of passing that set count or maybe set method of that particular variable, what you get a dispatch method. And in dispatch, you can dispatch whatever action you want to dispatch to either update and decrement the state which you want. It's pretty similar the way we use reducer in Redux, which we have create some action, and then that action gonna have some specific type and some specific payload, and based on that payload and then specific type, we have some switch cases, and then that reducer function which we pass inside the connect component and stuff like that. So it's going to be pretty similar. It's actually pretty similar to that. The use reducer actually accepts it's actually an alternative to use states, because this use reducer is also going to affect this specific component only. If you're trying to if you're updating the value or dispatching an action from this specific component, it's not going to other specific component where you have you may have used the same reducer and passed the same state and same action, because this works as an alternative to state. And it's accept a render function, sorry, a reducer function and an initial state, similar to other reducer function which we used to create in Redux. And it's return current state and dispatch. So whatever the current value of that particular state gonna be, that is going to be returned. And then it's also going to return a dispatch dispatch whatever action you want. And every time you dispatch a method, and if you change the state value inside your reducer method, then it's going to re-run. So the other hook which we have is called use callback, and it helps you to create memoized callbacks. What memoized callbacks are is like whatever the value on that particular variable you get returned, it's gonna memorize that and put into a memory. And each time you're gonna use that callback with the same argument, instead of doing that computation and again, it's gonna return you value from the cache directly. So that's what a memoized callback is, and it's pretty simple to use. It actually accepts a function, returns a memoized callback, which you can call anywhere in your application, and it's recomputed on the dependency changes. So in this example, if the value of A or B actually gets changed, then your memoized callbacks return value will be changed. Otherwise, it's gonna be the same. And it's also good for child callbacks. Like if you have some specific child where you want to pass a callback, and in that callback you want to have some specific values to be sent to the children, and you only want that value to be and you only want your children to get the updated value when you manually update it, then this is the way you can achieve that. The other one is also pretty similar to use callback, but this, instead of returning a callback, it actually returns a value. So use memo is the next hook, which is here, and this as you see in this example, what is actually doing is taking a callback, and that callback have one specific method, like computing some specific information, and then that value is going to be cached. So every time you call this this specific method, this specific value going to be persisted in the memory, and it's gonna be returning directly from the memory, instead of doing this whole compute thing again and again. And it's also very similar to use callback. It's actually accept a function, but instead of returning a memoized callback, it's return a memoized value, and it runs during the rendering. So you have to be a little careful while using this specific use memo, because when your application component is rendering, it can run your memoized value. So your memoized value might be different based on your props or maybe other properties which you are using to pass into that particular function. And it's also get recomputed it if any of the dependency or any specific callback get called. The other thing which I want to talk about is use ref. And how use ref works is it's similar to the ref which we are pretty uh, used to use in React space. Like this particular input element, if you want to create a ref out of it, it's going to get you that particular ref into the current specific property, and you can do certain things on that. So it's something like if you want to access a DOM node using inside a React component, and then you want to use that DOM node to do certain things, certain DOM operations, and then you can do that by using this. And the way it works is it's written on a mutable ref object, and on dot current represent the pass value. So if you're passing null, then it's going to be null, and then it's going to have that null get replaced with the actual element. So your input element will be available on input element dot current, and then you can do certain things on that particular thing. Like maybe in this example, what I'm doing is I'm just focusing out that particular input element, and it processed for lifetime. So this whole component lifetime, this input element gonna be there, and and it doesn't notify any specific content changes. So it's just a reference object, nothing more than that. There are some other hooks like use imperative handle. So it's similar to it's helpful when you're using ref, and instead of just returning the object with the current element, you can customize the instance instead of it and expose it to parent and stuff like that. And then other hook is use layout effect, which is identical to use effect, but it is fired sequentially after the DOM mutation. So if you want to use any mutations like mutation observer, or maybe window scroll event and stuff like that, you can use this use layout effect, and it's going to be a little bit and they're going to be a little bit performance benefit to that. And the other hook is use debug value, which is purely for React Dev tools. So if you're using React Dev tools, you can pass any custom hook or any custom value or display a label to a hook by using use debug value. The best thing about hook is they are composable. So you can create your own hook if you want. So if you see this particular example, I'm creating a hook called use win width, which is using window width and inside the component by listening to window.resize event. And this is an implementation of getting the width value of any specific window while resizing and after resizing, or before resizing, maybe on the load and stuff like that. And because and if you see a specific pattern there, because I'm also using use win width instead of any specific name. So React has also have released one specific linting system over there. So if you want to use and create custom hooks, make sure you name you name them in this way, so that the linting works. And the benefits and the properties of custom hooks are they can be composed using multiple hooks. If you see this example, I'm using use state and use effect both to actually compose my use win width, and they can be shared among components. So this can be a utility method which I can expose through export, and then they can be used anywhere we want, and they act individually, so they don't relate to or link these the components they are going to use with. I mean, they're going to be independent towards the component which they're using. So any specific state change or any specific effect you do in your custom specific hooks, they're gonna only rely to that particular component only. And so far what I've discussed is because how you can actually create state and life cycle in a function component, how you can actually manage state and life cycle methods inside a function component. And the one specific rule for hooks are they cannot be called conditionally. So you need to make sure that they are independent. They are independently called, and their value you can use conditionally if you want. And they are composable, so you can create custom hooks and you can compose them in a various way. And they are very easy to extract outside the component, so you can split out your logic tree into various custom hooks and stuff like that. Next is context. So what context is, it's provide a way to pass a data through component tree without having to pass props down manually at every specific label. So currently how React is pretty much taking data from inside the component tree is only using through props. So what context does is, it's actually let you create a context by using create context, and it gets you two specific thing. One is called provider and the other one is called consumer. So consumer and provider are pretty similar in a way. The similar we use these pub/sub models. So this provider is going to be your producers, and this consumer is going to be your consumer specifically. So anywhere you want to consume this value sent and updated by provider, you need to use this consumer component. And the create context method actually returns a context object which contains provider and consumer, and it also can have a display name, which is very helpful when you're using React Dev tools actually. And it can be used in either components, like either a class component or a function component. In both component types, you can use context. So as I mentioned, you're gonna get context.provider, which gonna lets you to consume and subscribe those specific changes, and similarly a consumer which gonna re-render and any context changes which you can do onto those specific methods. So let's create a simple shared store using context and use reducer hook. The example goes, and also we found on this particular URL which I mentioned there. So in this thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a reducer, this is a very simple reducer method. I'm just having one plus and minus method over there, and I'm just incrementing the state of the count property of the state, either incrementing that or decrementing that. And then I'm creating a context out of that state and reducer which I've defined. And then this specific component which I'm exporting over here is called store provider, and inside that store provider component I'm using use reducer. So that reducer function which I've created earlier, I'm using as a actually using inside that state provider component. And whatever and whoever is going to use this store provider component, I'm wrapping them into that context provider, which going to help me re-render this whole thing with when everything gets changed on the user. And that context.provider gonna require a value, so I'm passing the state and dispatch method so that anybody who is using the use context method inside that particular component, they can subscribe to and dispatch any method from that reducer. And if you see, I'm exporting that use context as a custom hook over here called use store. So instead of using use context, I'll be using use store over there. And here is my simple example of app where I'm using my store provider which I've just created and wrapping the app component inside that. And then in this example, if you see that counter component is actually using that use store which I'm created in the store, and that is dispatching the plus and minus stuff over there. So if you want to look at the code, the URL is mentioned below, and this works pretty much that way. And then this is a count, and this is where I'm using that counter component at all. Like I'm just importing that counter component and just using it into this app component. So so what we have seen so far is if React have some specific challenges if we are using classes, and with the hooks we can write down our React component in a better and cleaner way. I mean, when you have that particular feasibility to strip down your component logic into multiple files, or into multiple utilities and methods, then definitely you can structure and restructure your code in a way that it's going to be more readable, it's going to be actually more cleaner. And there are uh, and and in the React conf, they also mentioned that there is no plan to remove clauses from the React. So I would suggest that don't rest and start migrating your classes as of now. But yeah, I mean, keep an eye, because this, as per their documentation and as per their emotion, it's going to be future for the React, and they're going to keep developing React in that particular direction. And these hooks are 100% backward compatible, so you don't have any breaking changes. It's completely opt-out basis. If you want to use it, you can use it. Context API makes reuse difficult, so apply it sparingly if you want. Like, just be a little cautious when you're using context APIs. Don't try to put everything into the context and try to access everything from the context. So that's all. Thank you to be here, and thank you to listen to it. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Ashok, for your talk. It was nice having with you us. Next up, we have Nivita.
So, hello all. Hope everyone are being safe. So, before starting out with the session, I'd like to thank the Web Dev Live team who provided the awesome opportunity for me to give a presentation. So, I'd like to introduce myself a bit before starting it out. So, I am currently working as a software engineer at Fokites with around 3 years of industry experience. And apart from my regular job, I'm an ambassador for GDG and WTM Chennai community, where oh, sorry for the bad connection. So, yeah. So, apart from my regular job, I'm an ambassador for GDG and WTM Chennai community, where we conduct meetups, workshops, and coding jams around various technologies. And last but not the least, I love networking and coffee. So, without any further delay, let's get started with the session. So for today's session of understanding NG modules in Angular, we are going to cover the below topics as part of that. First, we will see about what NG modules are about. Then we will see why and when to use them and how to create the NG module in an Angular application. And then we'll see about what are the different parts of NG module. And then we'll see types of NG module. So this is pretty much the agenda for today's session. So this session is a little intermediate, so it would be great if you all have a basic knowledge of what a component in Angular application is and how they communicate with each other and what is a service and how components consume data from services. This is like pretty much how an Angular application basic setup would be a prerequisite for this particular session. And also a note, this is an introductory session for NG modules, so we will not be covering in detail about all the aspects of the NG modules. So these are the prerequisites for this session. So let's get started. So what are NG modules? The main purpose of the NG module is to organize the complex relationship between the views such as components, directives, and the data providers such as services. This actually helps a developer to give a definition of the relationship between the components services in a single file, instead of declaring them in all the files separately. So if any Angular application, if you take, we have 4 types of files. They are components, directives, pipes, services. These are EX6 modules, which are scoped within that module. So which are very different from NG module, which are present in the Angular application. In Angular application, we'll be grouping all those directives, pipes, and components and data providers together and give them a kind of relationship among them. So there will be a lot of modules and features available if you take any web application, right? So the application kinds of becomes really complex when it goes to the next level. So we are grouping them using NG modules. This is the main purpose of using NG modules. So next we will see how to create an NG module. So as you can see in this example, we'll be using the ng module decorator to create an ng module and also we'll be exporting that particular class. And in any Angular application, we have these 4 parts as said before. So, and if you see, components, pipe, and directives will always be grouped together under different properties of an ng module, like declarations, exports, and imports. And the services, which are injectors, which will be wrapped under a different component of an ng module. So now we will see what are feature modules. So we will be using the feature modules where the application is a complex application and we need to create submodules to make it more module. So we cannot create all the components and services and pipes together in a single file and export and import them and provide them to all the data source providers. So we will be dividing the entire application into different submodules and consume them in the feature module. So that's pretty much the feature module. So for example, if you see in this website template or any web application you take, there'll be different components associated with it, like a login, contact, and a main page. So we'll be dividing them into different modules and we'll be importing them into the main app module. So for the previous example, we can declare 2 modules like app and login and then import them in the main feature module. So next, we will see the metadata sessions available while creating ng module. So this is the metadata for ng module. And we will be looking at each of the properties in the coming slides. And in this example, as you can see, we will be importing the ng module first from the Angular core library. And we'll be declaring with ng module decorator. And we'll be having 5 different properties associated with ng modules like imports, providers, declarations, exports, and bootstrap. And finally, we'll be exporting this particular app module class to the other application. So we'll be seeing each one of these imports, providers, declarations, exports, and bootstrap in the coming slides. The first up is declarations. The declaration is a property where we will declare all the components, directives, pipes, which are privately available to that particular module. So if you take, for example, a login module, you'll be declaring all the components, pipes, and directives associated with that login module in the login app. So that's where the declarations come. Next is the exports. So if you want any of the components, services, or pipes present in a module, say module A, to be available in a module B, then we have to declare it in the exports property of the module. So this is based on the object-oriented programming concept where the components, directives, and pipes are by default private. and we need to add them in the export module to be usable by other modules. So all the exports property can be imported in a module by declaring them in the import section of the ng module. So the last one is the bootstrap property. We will be declaring the root component which is used to initially load our application by calling the component declared here. Usually the app component is the default component which will be declared here in any Angular application. Then at last, in the providers property, we provide all the data providers like services, our codes here. So here we'll be basically hitting all the APIs and get the data, and those kind of services will be added in the provider session. And this is the last module of a ng module. So these are the various properties that we can declare in ng module and declare a relationship between various component services and pipes required for a particular feature, easily using an ng module. So this kind of gives an abstract view for any application and to make it more scalable. So I know there are a lot of concepts to grasp on, but I will just summarize that all we discussed in short, and these are the key takeaways you can have from this talk. So first we saw what are ng modules. So they are basically helping a complex application to be organized and give a relationship between the views such as components, directives, and the data providers for a particular application. Then we saw how to create an ng module using the ng module decorator from Angular code. And also we saw the various properties of an ng module like imports, exports, declarations, and providers. And these are the main takeaways I would like all you to remember when creating a complex Angular application. So thank you all for joining the session. This is pretty much the introductory concepts for ng modules. I hope you have got a basic idea of them and when to use it. And I would love to connect with you all in social media. I'm pretty active in LinkedIn and Twitter. So thanks all folks. So be safe and be kind to one another.
Thank you, Nivita. That was a great talk. Thank you, Nivita. That was a great talk about the ng modules. I'm sure that the ng modules is one of the most important concept in Angular, and it is really hard to understand for the new developers. And you just gave a brief summary about it, so I'm sure it will help a lot of new developers who are trying to come into the Angular space. And next talk we have Aman Sharma. So Aman Sharma is a lead at mobile-web.dev, and he's an CTO at Twimbit, and he's member of AMP and OSI. So I'm sure he will be sharing a lot about AMP today, and his talk is about AMP everywhere. So let's hear Aman. Over to you, Aman.
Thank you, Santosh, for switching me in. And hello, good evening, and welcome everyone from wherever you are watching. I was really excited for this particular session on talking about AMP everywhere. I hope your earlier learning with other sessions have been going pretty interesting. We learned about Web Vitals, progressive web apps, which will be coming in upcoming days. Also, Elaine told about AMP. But here I'm going to talk about something else, something that's everywhere. So that's AMP everywhere. Let's start with a little bit about introduction about me. I'm Aman Sharma. As said, I'm a founder and CTO at Twimbit. Twimbit is a research tech company. And also I'm a lead at open source mobile web community that is named as mobile-web.dev. Also, I am a quite frequent member with AMP and open source initiative. So let's get started. If you have attended yesterday's talk from Saurabh Rajpal, where he talked about Web Vitals 2.0, you may be familiar with how much Web Vitals are actually important for not just normal developers who are developing websites, for people who are developing big applications which requires front end and code like that. But developers have always struggled with switching between fast and compelling kind of system. Some of these frameworks are fast, but they are not compelling. Some of them are compelling, but they are relatively slow. So what we can actually do over here? Plus, I have seen that the performance is not consistent. Sometimes it performs amazing on Chrome, and sometimes it's just like, not that fast on previous browsers like Internet Explorer and things like that. But if there was a framework or maybe just a proper infrastructure which ensures that everything, you know, works fine on all the platform. So all our worries are over now. AMP is here to rescue you. AMP is trying to make the web fast one platform at a time. And today in this session, we'll go through all these components one by one. To quickly start with definition, Hiren already covered most of the important stuff about AMP. So AMP is a web component framework for easily creating user-first websites, stories, ads, emails, and more. And we'll be covering a little bit about all these four components that are website, stories, ads, and more. So if you look in from a framework kind of perspective, it's like almost what there is out in terms of web. And no other web frameworks are actually doing that. So we can say the army of AMP as Avengers, something like that. AMP Avengers, like Avengers, if you get the joke. But it's about speeding up the website, stories, ads, and emails format. If this is overwhelming for you, don't worry about it. I'll be touching all the things from introduction to how you can get started and how you can step into the actual technical world. So AMP offers a lot of presence across different platforms and different components, let's say. The first one is AMP websites, which is the most commonly used. It's a way to create flawless web experience, mainly websites. Then you have web stories, which is a very interesting and new way of telling an interactive story in form of web. Also, you have AMP ads, which is a super fast platform to deliver ads to your audience. And then you have AMP emails, that is just going to change the way you see email forever. So let's start with AMP pages first. So AMP pages, as said by Hiren also, it's a way that how you actually create different websites on the web. And it's a very like easy and user-first website way of user-first way of creating website with AMP. So here is where the first AMP everywhere concept comes. If you see, the caching generally is done by CDNs. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And you might say, okay, I already have my website on Cloudflare or similar CDN servers, which almost cost me nothing. That's great. But actually, CDN is not that easy. You have to remember if the person is actually loading from which region, which kind of content is actually loading. You need to ensure the language barriers and other things. That there are a lot of complicated things. And it's just so overwhelming that you are not enough just a web developer. Now you have to become a DevOps and system engineer also. So AMP is here for you to rescue. Now, if you see the blue flags on this map, these are edge servers, and these are actually the Google's edge server. Let's say your site is located somewhere near web servers in New York, and you want to provide a CDN support which is spread across everywhere. If you create your website with AMP, Google does this job for you. Using AMP ensures that all your website is cached on Google server actually. So if recently, if you have seen a news on Google search, at least on mobile, you will be able to see that there is a small bold icon that appears on the top search results. That bold icon is not just to say that, okay, this is a fancy way of kind of flash story or something. No, this actually tells the audience that this is the most safest and most fastest among other results. So let's quickly see an example. I have an example which can show you how this thing looks like. So I have modded my this browser a little bit to show you a result. And this is a very trending story about Vikas Dubey lately. And let's see what kind of thing AMP is doing. So you will be able to see there is a bold icon on this NDDB first result, which means they are AMP. And then you are also able to see there is dynamic search results, which is also powered by AMP. If I click one of the results, you see how fast this actually loads. If you closely look at the URL, it is actually google.co.in/AMP. So this is my proof of concept that AMP actually cached your website. What this actually means that your website will be loading better than any other website. When other websites are just struggling on loading the basic files, your AMP pages has already loaded. It's like it was always there in the search results. Isn't that awesome? And this was done without you setting any network or CDN at all. You just created your AMP page and Google does the rest of the things for you. Other benefits of AMP pages actually include very flexible and very less complex way to code, which performs amazing and different kind of standard like compatible layouts on Google search results. It also improves the overall user experience. They can directly interact with your search results directly from Google search, and your core business metrics are also intact. You don't need to develop a lot of things to make your website fast. Consider website building with AMP like building something with Lego bricks. So the components that you need, these are the building blocks. And it doesn't matter how much you use it, the performance will remain consistent. Even if you use a single AMP component or you use 100 of them. AMP will ensure that your website loads with 100% performance always. Plus, if you are not a sneaky coder like me, like uh, building AMP pages is fun and easy. You don't need to remember a lot of JavaScript and all that. In fact, if you don't even know JavaScript, you can add a lot of interactivity just by using AMP components and AMP interactive actions. Also, it's a sustainable way to create an open web where everybody has a shared responsibility of making web faster. Plus, you don't need any kind of modules or any kind of server-side rendering or anything like that to make sure that your website is fast. It is all automatically applied through various web touch points, including web vitals, page like speed score, and everything. So these are some of the success metrics for those of you who really think that, okay, impress me by numbers. So you see there is increased traffic, there is increase in the mobile search results, and also increase in the faster load page time. If you're a publisher, this will be very, very interesting to you to use AMP for your websites. This is a kind of hello world DIY example of how you can get started with AMP. As told by Hiren, you start with HTML document declaration with the bold AMP emoji icon. This is actually something that I haven't seen with any other web component framework, so this is pretty cool, using emojis to write code. And then you have some boilerplate code that includes some CSS boilerplate and also the required JavaScript component files that AMP actually needs. Then everything you want to include in a website goes inside body. But wait, you can't use normal HTML over here. You have to use all the AMP HTML. Don't worry about making errors. There is a plugin called as AMP Validator, which will help you correct your code or issues that you're having instantly while you code it. So let me give you a quick example of how a validator looks like, if I'm on the correct page. So this is amp.dev, and I have installed the AMP validator extension over here, and you can see that it is currently green. Green means good, right? So this is how you can actually see the validation results. But let's go to a different side that is maybe having some little bit of errors, maybe because the developer was not active enough. And let's see if it's how our validator shows the results. So as you can see, the website is loaded and the page is not detecting it as AMP. So this is the difference how you can detect and not detect an AMP website. Second thing on the list is AMP Playground. If you are a fussy person about like setting up your own IDE or code editor, don't worry about it. You can try out almost all the component directly inside AMP Playground on playground.amp.dev, where you can easily see DIY examples from different different components that AMP offers, and you can try them out even without writing a single line of code. You can also test out your own website by importing the URL now. For example, this amp.dev, and when you import this URL, it will tell you if it's 100% valid or not. And you can see the responsiveness and its effect on different screen sizes. Isn't that amazing? Next, for those of you who use a framework like WordPress, WordPress has an AMP plugin. Most of the Indians actually create website with WordPress. And you can just start with adding AMP plugin and test out if your website is 100% AMP valid already. Chances are, if you use one of the supported theme or plugin, your website will automatically become AMP without you writing a single line of code. If you create projects with frameworks like Next.js, it also has AMP support to create super fast web experiences. Okay, that's amazing. We created an awesome website. But aren't we spending most of our time looking at these cat stories on Instagram? I was doing that. I actually installed my Instagram a couple of days before. But the concept is it's so fast and fun way of interacting with the content. Actually, according to a report, it was found that tappable experiences have been the best content consumption format ever. But there is a small catch over here. You can't actually view them more than 24 hours, right? Or you can't just share it with someone who doesn't have Instagram. That's where the solution lies. This is called web stories. It's exactly like pulling out the story concept from different platforms and bringing them to web, so that you can create them and share them with anyone. So web stories are actually narrative visual interactions like you see on the screen, which are easily tappable, provide you a full screen effect. You can add your animations, you can add background narratives, and create the fast and fast loading experiences to tell your content in a narrative format. And again, it offers the same capability of AMP caching and AMP speed that AMP website offers. So let's quickly go and see how does that look like. So our community mobile web dev actually has an AMP story as its landing page because we wanted to do things differently. So let's see what happens when I click on this link. As you can see, there is a bold icon over here. And as soon as I click, this story actually loads instantly. And it actually opens on google.co.in. Right now, we are hosting the story using, you see, this is Google Web Server. But if I interact and reload this mobile web.dev, we actually hosted this with GitHub pages. So this tells you that you only need a static hosting, you don't need any dynamic hosting to do that. Also, you can add a bunch of other things like Google Analytics and integrate it with different dynamic frameworks to create awesome dynamic things. There are other benefits to AMP stories too. As you can already tell, that it's a beautiful and engaging way to create instant available content. Also, it provides you editorial freedom of creating your own branding and not putting some names like Snapchat or Instagram on it. It's totally yours, you can share it anywhere. It's easily shareable and linkable on the open web. You want to add it to your website using an iframe, you can do that. You want to share it as a college presentation assignment, you can do that. You are fighting for an NGO cause, you don't want people to download an app for you to tell a story, you can do that with AMP stories. You can easily also measure the track, or you can also easily measure and track how much well your AMP stories are performing. Now, let's take a step deep into what this track and measure actually means, because this is the most interesting one according to me. Generally, when you add analytics to any website, you can only track how many people are coming to your website, how much time they are spending. You can also see where they are going and how they are exiting the page. But you cannot actually see at which section they are going, which section is interesting to them. But with AMP stories, you can track individual tabs. You can track at which step of the story they are actually going on and make content changes accordingly. And of course, it provides the same AMP fast nature as always. This is the best and immersive way of telling a story. Let's start with a small example of how you can create your own story. Now, assuming that you have already added the AMP story tag in the HTML doc type, you have to actually include the AMP JavaScript library inside the head tag. Then you have to declare the AMP story standalone component inside the body. And you cannot include any other HTML code inside it if you are including AMP story. It works only in standalone mode. Then you include some information like what is the title of your story, the publisher, in this case, that's your name or your startup's or company's name. You can also add publisher logo so that it appears as a title icon or a watermark at some places. And you can also include a cover image if when you share it on Twitter or on other platforms, how does it appear sometimes. So understanding the way AMP story is created is similar to how you create stories on Instagram, but it's just flexible and you can create it with code. So let's imagine the cat story that we were creating. The clouds are actually your background and the mountains are your cat. So these are the different elements that you can place on different positions of your screen. Then these elements together form a layer which are clubbed together. Okay. You can also add multiple layers so that you can create a good animation effects and add some kind of 3D parallax effect if you want. Then these layers together forms different pages for the AMP story. And then you have the full AMP story, which is offered as a single link. This is a code view of how you can like create AMP story in terms of code. So in the main tag, you have AMP story standalone component. Inside that, you declare different pages. AMP story page, for example, ID page 1 for the first slide, then ID page 2 for the second slide. And then inside the individual page, you have different layers. You can add a story grid layer and apply different templates like vertical, horizontal, or text nature. And then inside the grid layer, you have your elements. You can know more about AMP stories by visiting on amp.dev/about/stories. If you are not a code freak and you are a visual designer, content designer who is freak about it, AMP offers a solution in that case too. AMP recently launched something called as Web Stories Editor, which you can install in your WordPress website and create easy web stories just using drag and drop options. You can also share these stories as an individual HTML and host it anywhere. So go give it a try. Okay, so we made the web fast, we made the web interactive, but what are these things? Huh? I guess this is the ad. I'm not fat, but ads are a way to reach out to the customers, no? But why this cat is crying? Maybe this ad is not that fast at all. This is why it's crying. Exactly. Nobody likes ads, but what they don't even like more is a slow ad. And this is AMP ads, which saves your slow loading ad from your website and create an awesome experience for publishers. In a first glance, you know, seeing is believing. You can see a difference between a regular ad and an AMP ad. An AMP ad actually loads 6 times faster than a regular ad. And it's just like instant, then like waiting for the ad to load and then it loads. So publishers and different marketers and advertisers find great metrics and value proposition using AMP ads in terms of revenue, in terms of click-through rates, and the total load. Because ultimately, your customer decides your nature from the first impression that you have. Nobody wants to come on your website and wait for your AMP, like this ad to load. Plus, why he should actually waste his data on stupid ads that actually use a lot of JavaScript? So AMP ads actually solve all these problems. Other benefits that AMP ads includes is end-to-end experience control. What this means, the user starts with a very fast web experience from a Google search results maybe, lands up into your AMP page, which is also fast, sees a fast AMP ad, then click on the ad, perform the action, which is also fast. So everything is fast and he doesn't feel any lag or any widescreen whatsoever through the whole journey. Plus, it provides you easy measurability of your ads by implementing the same tracking that you would do with manual ad control by using AMP Pixel and AMP Analytics. You can also reduce your complex operations of managing different ad agencies and things like that by just implementing component-based AMP ads to different publishers. It helps you maximize your revenue because ultimately a happy customer is a paying customer, right? And your technician doesn't need to know everything. AMP Ads is powered by the same collaborative AMP community that runs all these fast projects. So they help you out at every point. Ultimately, this means a good return on investment or whatever you're doing to put on it. So let's see a quick example if you are like with me still like in the code zone. So this is normal HTML code, and we are going to modify this with AMP ads. Now we'll continue the same tradition of adding the bold emoji icon with for ads, which declares that it's actually an AMP HTML document. Then we'll add a AMP ads JavaScript library inside the head, add some little bit of boilerplate code so that everything looks fine. And then voila, everything about your ad goes inside the HTML body. Again, remember to use only AMP tags inside the body, and it should be 100% valid too. In this example, you can see we have added a AMP img, and we have linked it to amp.dev. For added control and visibility, we have also added AMP pixel, which helps us track how much our ad is performing well. And ultimately, this is how our code looks. That's it. To know more about ads, you can also visit amp.dev/about/ads, or I can show you a live example from the playground. As you know, this will be a good practice to see how actually playground works. So as you can see, if I change it to AMP ads, it obviously show 169 errors because this is an AMP website, not an AMP ad. So let's go ahead and try to find a slides ad example. Now, as soon as I load it, you can see this is loaded instantly. And this may be a website and you want to sell this, I don't know what is this, Yas or Audi, but whatever it is, it provides a fast ad experience in terms of carousel. And you can say it's 100% valid. So you can go ahead, add it to your publisher's website, and it will perform amazingly fast. Okay, amazing. We have also created ads, which is a good way to reach out to your audience. But do you remember how we actually communicate these days on the web? How did you actually receive the registration confirmation? Maybe, what was it? It's email, right? What next we can do with emails? If there is an email like a alien conference and they're discussing about, let's come up with ideas what next we can do with emails. What do they suggest? Maybe they will say let's call them a new thing like a Gmail or email or a Hey, which is very popular these days. Or we can also introduce ads to increase a little bit of revenue. After all, we are providing them for free. But one sneaky person among you will actually answer, let's make them interactive. And he'll be thrown away. Nobody will understand. What are you saying? How can humans be interactive? But this person actually land up to earth and he create AMP emails. Yes, guys. Now, this is obviously not the actual story how AMP emails come into existence, but you get the story. AMP email is interactive and a dynamic way of creating emails. Not just sending some kind of text and poster kind of raw material to a person in his email inbox, which is very bold about. But imagine what if you can provide an interactive website or an interactive app inside his email inbox, where he just doesn't need to go outside your email to perform an action. This is what AMP email actually does. If you see in this example, GoIBibo in India recently tested out and sent out a survey form to all of their partners, and they were able to respond directly with this survey directly inside their email inbox. So they don't need to go to any external link to actually apply for that. And they saw that it had a 23% increase rate than a normal email. AMP email is currently supported by Gmail, Outlook, and Mail.io. I hope you are not on Yahoo Mail yet. But if you are on all these platforms, you can already try how AMP email works out. So benefits, obviously, everything needs to have benefits. You have increased email capabilities. It's not just a poster slide or text that you are sending someone to email, but actually some interactions that they can perform inside the email inbox. Next thing, you can increase the personalization. If you want, you can load the dynamic code from your backend server and show some kind of customizations, such as if you are a retail provider, you can show customized objects in his inbox rather than sending him the same email that you send to everyone. Also, it also increases the customer experience inside the AMP email. They can perform different actions like giving ratings, filling out a form, or just giving you a feedback. It's totally safe and secure, so don't worry about that it's an experimental feature or something like that. And it's totally consistent and scalable. You don't need to worry about scaling up any infrastructure or thinking about, okay, do I need another SMTP server or something like that. And it's an improved and smarter way of providing services to your customer, isn't it? So let's go ahead and see a small example of how AMP email looks like. So again, now you are already understanding this thing with me that there is a tradition of using emojis in AMP. So firstly, we will add a HTML document declaration for HTML bold emoji icon for email, which tells our email client that this is not a normal email, guys. This is something outstanding. Then you have your AMP script loaded inside the head tag. Then directly you add all of your HTML code that you generally add in your email also to create interactive email inside the body tag, but only using AMP HTML components. And that's it. You can also try a small example by visiting amp.gmail.dev/playground. Somehow this feature is still experimental, so some of you might face some issues in receiving it. You might need to turn on experimental button, but we'll see this emails to coming in mainstream very soon. So seeing is believing, guys, right? Let me give you a small example of what you can do. So I have created this small code of AMP email where I'm asking for a survey. Generally, what you would do with the survey is add a link, and then a person opens the survey form, and then he'll able to answer, the reply to whatever email you sent. But in this example, I have asked for an option, and when he clicks on the option, depending upon his mode, we also ask him some more information, and then he can send this feedback. We have also set up a backend server which receives this feedback, and that's it. Let's send this email out. I have turned on the experimental inbox feature inside my email, and you can see pretty much in my primary email that I have a AMP email. This is a little different than other emails. It says that it's a dynamic email, which is the character for showing that it's an AMP email. Let's see if it works or not. So how would you rate your year's conference? Of course, it was awesome. Let's send them some feedback. It was amazing, guys. Keep it up. Send feedback. That's it. It's done. I didn't press on any button or change my window or anything like that and perform all the action inside the AMP email. Isn't it great? I hope you are going smooth with me, guys. And we are almost up to what next, which means we have covered pretty good components like AMP websites, AMP stories, AMP ads, AMP emails. What can we do next with AMP? Where else it can go if we have to establish an ad? Maybe we can create a native app-like experience, like what happens in a progressive web app if we add AMP. Wait, that's already possible. Tribune has already tried it, and they have seen a wonderful response to this thing. They have seen increased user engagement, better viewability, and readability. So you can also try out using AMP inside PWA, which will create exactly a native experience. Plus, it has just graduated from OpenJS Foundation. What this means is that it's now more accessible and open to different developers, which means that people can independently drive the AMP whole platform and can create new features as per their choice, as they want it. So how can you become an AMP developer? I think that's what you are thinking. It's simple. I have a small riddle for you. Simply go and solve this. I don't think it's too tricky, right? What is this? A bold icon, a black circle. Oh yeah, that's a big dot. And then a person using MacBook. What is it? The bold icon is for AMP. Oh, this is am.dev. Yes. For anything that you need related to AMP, just visit am.dev. You don't need to go through a complete XYZ certification or read a full book to learn AMP. You just need to know the basic implementation characteristics of AMP, and rest of things you can just go anytime on AMP component catalog and click on the component to see how you can implement that component inside your website. We have also, with Mobile Web Dev, done a small crash course few days back, which is an extensive course to go from 0 to 100 in AMP. And we covered almost everything in AMP website, AMP stories, and in AMP emails. So go check it out if you want to learn more about AMP. Also, this is totally by the community and for the community. So means we all are equal part of it. You can go to am.dev and start seeing how you can actually contribute. Maybe there is something that is just missing for you. You can also report any issues that you find with current AMP platform, and this will help make the AMP a better place. If you visit the AMP GitHub repository, you can already see there are so many contributors that are working along with AMP, and there are so many things that are regularly coming on AMP platform. You can also join our Indian community mobile web dev, where we actively participate in different conferences related to AMP, and that will be a healthy way of making world a better place. So that's amazing. We covered Web Vitals, have 100% scores on Lightning and everything. And not just that, we have Web Vitals covered not just in website, but everywhere. And that is the best thing, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this session with me, as I enjoyed by telling the whole AMP story. If you have any question, do remember to ask me in the Ask Me Anything session. And sorry for bothering you with so many memes, but I hope you enjoyed. Thank you, guys. Have a nice one.
Sharing your wonderful talks on AMP. Well, folks, in the chat box, let us know if you have used AMP before by sharing thumbs up. And now we have a session of for Angular. So Santosh, would you like to share your experience with Angular?
Yeah. Thank you, Rijraj. So next talk we have is on Angular, and Stephen is going to be us with soon, and he'll be talking about the past, present, and the future of Angular. So if you know, we have releases every 6 months, and now we just released Angular 10 few days ago. So there will be some updates regarding the Angular 10, and then how we can be future proof with Angular. And there are some amazing features which actually landed in Angular 10, and which will make a way for Angular 11 eventually, and going onwards Angular 12. So don't be scared. I mean, whenever there is a new version, it's not like we have not taken care of anything. Everything is taken care of by using ng update command. I mean, I have heard the feedback from the community that they are able to update a very huge application within an hour, which is like a great progress, of course. So let's wait, and let's hear from Stephen as once he's online. So I think we are facing some difficulties, but in case you have any questions related to Angular, feel free to ask them in the chat window. Ask we will take it during our AMA session, where we will have all our speakers. Yep, I think Stephen has joined us. So let's hand it over to the Stephen, and we are really grateful because he took time, like waking up at 6 a.m. in the morning to deliver a talk. He's just there for the community. So let's hand it over to Stephen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's very fun to be here. So as they said, my name is Stephen Fluin, and I am a DevRel lead on the Angular team at Google. And so my job is really to be here for the community, to make developers and organizations successful, as well as to reflect the needs of the community onto the team, so that as we evolve and make Angular better over time, we're doing it in a way that's listening and being as involved with the community as possible. And so that's why I'm here today. So we are here today talking about making your Angular applications as fast and as fresh as possible. And there's a lot of different techniques to do this, and there's a lot of talks out there. And so with this talk, I've been trying to do something a little bit different than usual, which is that instead of going to a slide deck instead of presentations, I want to just show you some of these techniques and show you some of these strategies live in code. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to be taking a look at some real Angular applications that I've just created on my disk here in the last couple of days. And then we're going to be making some changes to those Angular applications. We're going to be seeing some of the things that we can do to make that application better, to make that application faster. And then what we'll do is we will take a look at the impact of these things and see how these strategies affect our application overall. Does that make sense? Let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see here, I am staring at a brand new Angular application that was scaffolded using the CLI. So I just basically ran ng new. And so this is the default Angular application you're going to get out of the box. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go and make some changes to this application, because right now it's actually a little bit too basic for us to show off some of the things that we're talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the code. This should look super familiar to anyone that's done Angular before, where we have our source folder, we've got our app folder, and we could do something like, for example, in our app module, we can go ahead and do a bunch of imports. So because we've used the CLI, because we've said, yes, we want to enable routing, we've got things like the app routing module in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a few more dependencies. So I'm going to import a HTTP client module. I'm going to import the forms module. I'm going to import the reactive forms module. And what we should be able to do is, if we fix these imports, is see our application kind of gain access to these features. And so let's go ahead and do the imports. So from that Angular common HTTP to get our HTTP client module. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for forms module. Let's see if we can find the reactive forms module. Right here, we should just auto format that. All right, so this is just like we'd be doing in a normal Angular application. We're taking a existing app and we're adding in some new dependencies. But there's a couple more things that I want to add in. I want to actually use Angular Material a little bit for this demo. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to opt down into our terminal window here. Let's just make a new window so everything's fresh and clean here. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the ng-add command to install Angular and Material and configure it for our project. So I'm going to say ng-add Angular/material. What this will do is this will go download the Angular Material package from the internet, and it will start setting it up and configuring it for my project. And so when you run ng-add, it doesn't just add it as a dependency, it actually executes the schematics in that. So we've got a nice little prompt here asking us what sort of theme we want, asking us if we want to set up the typography styles, asking us if we want to set up browser animations. And so these are all the configuration steps that are necessary if you want to go and do a good job of using something like Angular Material. All right, those packages are installed. And the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to want to, in the background here, I'll just restart our ng-serve so that we're serving with the latest dependencies. Now, what I want to do is I want to actually use Angular Material. I want to create some templates that are using some of the components and some of the capabilities of Angular Material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ng-generate, and I'm going to use some of the starter components from Angular Material. So this time I'm going to generate @angular/material. And I'm going to say, please generate a material dashboard component. And we'll just call this component dashboard for lack of a better name. Now what this should do is it should create a dashboard component and then pull in automatically all of the dependencies we need in order to render that component. So if we look in our files tree, we're going to see this new dashboard component. And it's given us this full kind of feature-rich dashboard. And it's also pulled in, as I mentioned, all the modules needed to run that. So if we take a look at the app module, we're going to see we've got mat grid list module, mat card module. So these are all of the Angular Material modules we needed in order to render that component. So let's go ahead and in our app component, actually use this. So we'll just delete all that boilerplate, except the router, and we'll say app dashboard. So there we have, we're using our new dashboard component. And if our ng-serve succeeded, which it should have, we should be able to take a look at our application. Now we've replaced that default basic application with this nice little dashboard. You've got animations, you've got inkiness. So this is now in bundle size world, a real application. We've actually got some dependencies, we've got some loaded. So now we have a real application. Now I want to actually start diving into some of the best practices that we should all be following to stay as fast and fresh as possible. So the first thing I recommend you do is pull up the Angular JSON file. And so this is a file that just lives in the root of every Angular workspace, and it configures the way that Angular should be building and configuring your project. And so in here, you're going to find a lot of those configurations. And what I want to find is I want to find the production build configuration. So this is the configuration that applies when you do an ng build --prod. And there's two keys in particular that I care about. So I care about this source map key and I care about this named chunks key. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set each of these to true. So I'm going to say yes to source maps and yes to named chunks. What source maps gives me is it gives me a mapping when we do that build. So instead of just getting out the pure JavaScript that is being rendered and run by the browser, we're also going to get a mapping that says, where does every bit of that JavaScript in the production bundle come from, whether that's TypeScript, whether that's HTML. It follows it all the way back to the code that you're writing so that you understand what's in your production bundle. And so this is going to be one of the key and most essential strategies for keeping your application as fast as possible. And I always turn on named chunks to true. This is a feature that allows you to, instead of when you run a build and you end up having a bunch of different chunks that can be lazy loaded by Angular, this actually gives all those chunks names based on where they are in the file system. And this is just a really helpful thing that I've seen. And it doesn't really reveal anything. It's not really a security hazard. So I always just turn that on. So now that we've got source maps and we've got named chunks, what we're going to do in the background is I'm going to run an ng build --prod. And so this is going to take our application. It's going to create a production build. So it's going to do all the minification, all the tersing, all the obfuscation, all those sorts of things that happen as a normal build. But this time we're going to get these essential source maps out, which is going to be key for us. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to install another tool into my system. So you can either install this globally, so you can see yarn global or npm install -g, but we're going to install something called Source Map Explorer. So let's go ahead and in our second tab here, let's do that. So we're going to say yarn global add Source Map Explorer. So there's a bunch of these tools out there. These tools are designed to take those source maps and show you a visual representation of your bundles. But Source Map Explorer is definitely the one that our team recommends. If you use something like Webpack Bundle Analyzer, it actually starts analyzing these source maps at the wrong step of the process. And so you can actually miscategorize and give you a false understanding of your bundle size and where it's coming from. So we've got Source Map Explorer installed now. And as soon as our production bundle is finished, which it looks like it is, we can go ahead and cd into the dist folder and see that we've got a fast and fresh folder, which is big enough for everyone to see. Now, this is all of the bundles for my application today. And so what I can do is I can run Source Map Explorer, and I can pass in one of those bundles. So we'll just pass in the ES 2015. We're going to get this really great visual representation of all the things that we have in our application. So you can see our application is about 445 KB for this bundle, and some of that's coming from Angular core features that we're using. Some of that's coming from animations, some of that's coming from the router, but we're also seeing all the material components that we're using. We're seeing CDK features that we're using. We're seeing RxJS. So you can see and understand the bundle so that you can start making intelligent choices about these things. So for example, if we didn't need any of these material components on our homepage of our application, maybe that's a login page or something, we shouldn't be loading these. And so understanding and managing your bundle is a game where you basically need to continually analyze and monitor the sort of code that you're writing and the code that your build is generating, and then making intelligent decisions about the architecture of your application. So, and the key strategy for doing this is called lazy loading. So oftentimes, maybe we do want all these features whenever we show the dashboard, but we know that we don't always want to show the dashboard to the user. And so lazy loading is the key in the feature that we use to take the features that you need and only load them when the user needs them. And you can do all sorts of really sophisticated strategies here where you can preload the features only when you need them, or you can use things like heuristics and say, I think my user is going to click on this, so I'm going to load it, or I'm going to take it out of the critical path by making it a lazy loaded chunk, but then load it as soon as the browser is able to, as soon as it has that free network and CPU space. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple ways to do lazy loading. So as we talked about before, I created this project with our router installed. So you can see we've got the router module configured. You've got a set of routes. Right now, this is just empty because we're not really using the routes too much. And I could manually go in here and create a bunch of different paths and use the load children key. So load children is what allows you to actually create a function that dynamically imports code, and Webpack just automatically splits that into a separate chunk. But what we're going to do is we're going to use with CLI because there's actually a really cool capability that makes this much easier. And so I'm going to, let's just clear the screen here. I'm going to say ng generate module, and I'm going to pass in a module parameter, which is a reference to a module saying, where do I want to register this new module? And we'll say, well, we want to register it in the app module. And then I'm going to say route. And what the route does, it says, where do I want to reference this module from in my route configuration? So let's maybe call this a new home screen. And then I'll just give the module a name. And what should happen if I've done this correctly, I'm in the wrong folder. Sorry about that. So if I've done this correctly, what should happen is it should find the app module. It should go ahead and update references from the routing for that app module, and then create not only a new module called home, but it's also creating a first component to it and routing to that. And so if we take a look here, we're going to see a new home module that imports the its own home routing module as well as the common module and declares the home component. And if we look at our app module and our app routing module, we're going to now see that nice new reference. So you've got a new path here named home. Maybe we could just call this default if we want. And it's loading the home module as a dynamic import. So this is a standard kind of web feature that Webpack knows how to resolve and VS Code knows how to resolve. And then we can actually say, hey, here's the symbol that we're getting out of that file that we are dynamically importing. So by doing that, whenever I do a build now, whenever I do an ng serve, which we'll spin back up here, Webpack and the Angular build are going to automatically split that out. And so we're going to not only see a main chunk, but now we're going to see a home module chunk that contains any of the imports that we do here. And so as we start importing and adding more features to our home module, we're only going to be pulling in that code, and we're only going to have to pay for that code when we use it. So you can see here that our home module is, at least in serve mode, very, very small, right? It doesn't have a ton of functions. It doesn't have a lot of features, but we're not making users pay for those features unless the user actually hits that page. The other thing you can do is you can see that we are, we can also try and do this again, and we can create another module. So we could say something like ng-generate module, module equals app.module, and route equals about. Try that. And so this is something you should get really used to doing, is every time you have a new set of features, a new set of screens in your application, consider making it a lazy loaded module. There are almost no downsides to doing this, and it just allows you the flexibility to make your application more performant, faster, better for your users in the long run. So I'm also going to do one more thing. And so we're going to actually take a look at another production build. So we're going to run ng build --prod again. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to run source map explorer on our dist folder. We'll just say, let's take a look exactly at our about module. So as soon as that production build is complete, which should be very, very soon here, we should see that we can actually analyze our about module. So a lot of developers, once you've been building with Angular for a while, get very used to seeing this 92% chunk asset optimization. That's where Webpack is actually doing the bundle math that allows it to split out all the chunks and only pull in their dependencies at the right time, as well as creating things like the common modules that allow you to have a lazy loaded chunk that is shared across a bunch of different chunks of your application. So we now have our about 2015. That should work. All right, so we can see, because we haven't pulled in any code into our about module, this is a very, very small chunk, and it's going to load very, very quickly, which is exactly what we want. So we started off talking a lot about staying fresh. And the two things to remember are you should be generating source maps, and you should be looking at those source maps, because it's very easy as we build out an application to accidentally import something, or import something because we need to build a new feature and not realize that you're bringing all this code with it that you might not have intended. And this is actually something the Chrome team has seen across the board, where they've worked with teams to help them build smaller, faster applications, and they do a really good job at it. But what ends up happening is that over time, as the features get developed, as more dependencies are brought in, teams backslide, and it's not always a conscious process. So Angular actually has something built in that allows us to make this more of a conscious process, and that is in the form of bundle budgets. So if we take a look again at our angular.json file, and we scroll this down a little bit, you're going to see this key called budgets. And so what budgets allow you to do is to actually inform the build what your expectations are around your bundle sizes. And so you can see we have some very, very conservative defaults. So we've got 2 megabytes for a warning, 5 megabytes for an error on the initial bundle, but we recommend you take these down a lot. So maybe even warning at something like 500 kilobytes, and maybe erroring at 1 megabyte, or 1 megabyte. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. You can look at just the initial bundle size. You can look at any script. You can look at all scripts. So just take a look at the CLI and the schema auto-completion for an understanding of kind of all the different options that exist. But by adding these bundle budgets in, instead of just this happening silently and my user starting to suffer, I actually take control as a developer, and I say, here are the expectations I have around my bundle. And then whenever CI runs, whenever I try new builds, I'm going to get immediate feedback about how that is affecting my application, which is really, really exciting. All right, so now combining the architectural pattern of lazy loading with a strong understanding of what bundle is actually being generated whenever I build my application, and maintaining and managing that over time with bundles, we've now probably done a very good job of making an application that is fast and fresh, or excuse me, fast, because what you effectively want is you want most of the code that you send down to the user to be executed. Now, you're never going to get to 100% coverage, but you want to try and maximize that number. So all of these strategies are going to allow you to do that, where don't download code that you don't need, because it just creates extra time, it creates extra bandwidth, it creates extra CPU cost, and all these things end up hurting your user experience. The other big thing that you should be doing in order to keep your application as fast as possible is staying up to date. So I've actually done something a little bit sneaky, where I did not build this application with the latest version of Angular. If you take a look at ng version, you can see that we're running Angular version 9, whereas the latest version is version 10. And so we're not actually getting all of the benefits of Angular, because one of the things that Angular does with every release that we do at the major level is we're looking for ways to make your application better, whether that is adding new sophisticated strategies when it comes to doing things like dynamic imports, lazy loading, tree shaking. There's a lot that we can do behind the scenes because we have this opinionated control of the entire stack, where we are the ones bringing in and configuring Webpack. And so we can do more advanced things, like we could switch from Webpack 4 to Webpack 5 when that comes out, if that benefits us. We could add in extra steps, such as adding in a roll-up pass. And so by allowing us to configure that build system for you, you're actually gaining this idea that we can make that better without you having to change a single line of code. And we were super successful at doing this in version 4, version 6, version 7, 8. And so this is something that we do try and put into every single release of Angular. And so the last thing that I want to show you is actually how to update your application, just because it's very, very easy. And we actually see that more than the majority of developers out there, as of the release of every major, are already on the latest. And so that is something really exciting to see, and it's something we want to continue to invest in. One of the ways that we make this happen is we use something called schematics. So as you may know, Google uses Angular quite extensively. And so it's actually up to us on the Angular team, because we live in a mono repository with all these apps that use Angular. We actually have to keep them up to date. So every time we have to push a breaking change to Angular, we have to go and tweak the thousands of applications that are using Angular. And so we could not do this by hand. We have to do this by automation in order to achieve the scale that we have. And so what we do is we actually take those automations and we offer them to the world in the form of these ng update schematics. And so we really love this idea that we can make changes to your project based on our knowledge of the changes we're making to Angular to make your application better and keep it up to date. And so we're going to go ahead and run the ng update command and see some of this in action. So just make sure we're in the right directory. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run ng update, and I'm going to pass it Angular core and Angular CLI. And usually you don't have to specify the version, but there's a small bug introduced in the last few hours. Anytime you want to do ng update in a controlled manner, you can specify the version you actually want to move to. So let's say you're on a version 7 application, you could move to version 8, then 9, then 10, kind of incrementally, and understand what's happening at every step along the way. So if I run this ng update command, and we always want to stay clean, so that what's happening here is the CLI will error by default if you have a unclean repository, because we want you to be able to analyze and understand the changes that we're making to your project. So let's just go ahead and add this. All right. If you wanted to, there's also an allow dirty flag, which can come in handy some of the time. One of the other useful flags that you should be aware of is called force. If you have a peer dependency that is not valid, so let's say you're using a library that says it's not compatible with version 10 of Angular, you can try the -- force flag and see if it works, because sometimes dependencies will have forgotten to update their peer dependency, and this will work just fine. I've seen this in a bunch of different cases, but just beware with what you're doing there, where it will ignore non-matching dependencies. So let's try this one more time and see what error we get. So it's using my package manager of choice, which is in my case is Yarn. It's downloading the latest version of Angular. It's going to go ahead and execute that update schematic. So as I said, it's updating all of the changes that have been made across core and compiler, and then you're going to get this nice little printout of all of the changes that it's making along the way. So we've renamed the browser list to .browserlist.rc. We've updated tslint, and so you can see all of this. And at the very, very end, you should see a kind of full guide to the migration. So you can see we've got an overall guide about the changes that have been made. And if we take a look at our project here, we can actually now step through and see all the changes that were made. So browser list was renamed. The dependencies have added to the package JSON. We've made some configuration changes to the tsconfig. And if I had a richer application with more features, we would see some of these other migrations showing up in that get log. So running ng update is definitely the recommended path. But if you want to really understand a little bit more about some of the things that's going on, there is a really great URL you should take a look at, which is update.angular.io. What update.angular.io does is it gives you this nice little dropdown where, based on the complexity of your application, you can actually see all the things that are happening under the hood. So it says you can see basic is for information that's relevant to all developers. Medium is information relevant to features that are used by about 10%. And advanced is basically every change that we've made to Angular. And so if we take a look at basic, you can see in version 9, you could have been making some changes to your localized function calls. You can see the ng update commands here. You can see browser src. And if we switch to advanced, for example, we're going to see all the changes that are happening under the hood. So even things like forms validation, min length and max length, the way that the validators are being applied are a little bit different. So it's a really kind of comprehensive way of understanding what's happening in Angular without having to go and read the changelog. So you can actually just understand for my project, based on the features that I'm using and the versions I'm moving between, what are the changes in my application. So with that, we have a application now that is as up-to-date as possible. It's as fast as possible because I've been using all of these advanced strategies. And now I've been successful as a developer. So that is the conclusion of our little talk here. The only other thing that I would possibly point out is we just updated the core and the CLI packages, which are the first ones you should always do. Now you can go back, if this was successful, then you can actually update all of your other dependencies. So your material, the CDK, any other libraries you've been pulling in. So with those changes, I've now made my application as fast as possible, as fresh as possible, and I'm making sure that I'm delivering the best possible user experiences. Thank you so much, and we will be chatting a little bit in the AMA.
Thank you, Stephen. That was some amazing contents which you gave to our developers out there. Uh, Lazy loading is, of course, one of the most important thing, and the ng update. I just love ng update because I have been doing Angular from a long time, and the only reason I'm able to stay fast and fresh with Angular is actually the ng update schematics. So thanks again for your wonderful talk, and we'll see you again on for the AMA session. For all the developers who are watching us live, please do ask some questions in case you have any for Angular. We'll you have the actually chance to ask it to Stephen live. So I hope you will get some more questions for Stephen, and we will be starting AMA session soon, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions to answer, and let's welcome our speakers again for AMA session in few minutes.
Hello, looks like we're back.
Session soon, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions to answer, and let's welcome our speakers again for AMA session in few minutes. Yeah, just a second.
Hello, looks like we're back.
Yeah, we are set up for the AMA session. Is anyone able to hear the echo? Is it good? Yeah. Thank you to all the speakers for taking their time and sharing the knowledge with us. And now it's time to answer the questions which we have from all the developers out there. So let's take the first question. And this question is for Hiren. Can we add AMP to Angular PWA using Angular CLI? Oh, wow, this is like all the stacks combined. So Hiren, would you like to go ahead and answer?
Yeah, sure. So Angular CLI does not have any inbuilt support for AMP, but what you can do certainly is if you have your Angular application which is not single page, and let's say for example you have a page one and page two, page one.html and page two.html, then what you can do is that you can create AMP version of those pages and convert Angular apps to AMP or add a power of AMP into Angular. But Angular CLI does not have anything or any command which you can use for adding the AMP feature, because AMP is altogether a separate framework and Angular CLI does not have any support for now. But this is how you can add AMP to your Angular application.
So, I mean, Stephen, do you have something to add here? I mean, of course, we are talking about Angular CLI. So, would you like to add something for AMP support? I mean, of course, difficult question.
Yeah, no, everything he said is right. So we don't have support for this natively. We have talked a lot about this, where like we've even used the term AMP Wang AMPWA Angular, so AMP Angular, to talk about this idea of this kind of ideal combination of PWAs plus AMP, where you load an AMP page first, it's like server-side rendered, and then you load the PWA in the background, and then every additional navigation ends up being served by the PWA. We don't have any built-in support for this, but we have seen a couple people doing it using Angular Universal, where you use some sort of server-side rendering in order to make sure all the static AMP tags exist, and then the PWA kind of loads in the background and replaces things.
Wow. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so the next question is from Serkan. I think it's for Ashok. What happens when I have a big React application and React is constantly adding new API for better performance? I mean, how easy it is to refactor the whole application for the new API? I'm sure this question is around how to update to the new API if you have existing APIs.
Yeah, so any specific migration is pretty much like painful. Okay, like either I mean, if you take the example of Angular, the migration is pretty smooth, and that's why a CLI in any specific technology or tool is pretty much helpful. But in case of React, we don't have a CLI, and this kind of refactoring like they did in 16.8 and other specific versions in React, it's pretty much painful. But you have to understand that where and how you are looking at your migration. What is the points and what is the gain of that particular activity you're trying to achieve? And if that weight is actually weighed out in that particular perspective, that where you have to migrate, then you have to plan it in a way so that it can be less painful compared to computers. Don't actually go for overall migration at once. Start by picking smaller pieces, smaller chunks of your code, and start doing migration into that. Code mods are going to be very helpful if you're going to plan out these kind of migrations, and specifically you're going to end up having a lot of ASTs and just renaming and removing all those older APIs to the new APIs. So code mods going to be really handy in that particular scenario. But yeah, again, you have to be a little bit conscious in that particular direction, that is that migration is really going to worth it. I mean, last year I did some migration in my old companies, and that was not on the front end technology but on the back end technology. But the challenges are pretty much similar. If you don't have built-in tool for migration in the technology you are using, then it's going to be all manual operation, and because of that manual operation, you end up creating that mess around the migration itself. So I would suggest, if you're planning to migrate and if you want to use that new APIs which your tool and technology is released, you have to first check that what kind of benefit is going to add, either it's going to be helpful in your specific use case or not. If it is, then plan out the migration in a smaller chunk, like split out into your project into multiple parts and see that which particular portion of your app require that migration immediately, and where you're gonna get the most of it, and based on that you can plan your migration.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, Ashok. I think next question is from Rajat Gupta. It's for Nivita. So can you please share good resources to get started with dynamic component in Angular? So Nivita, yeah.
Yeah, yes, Manish. So as far the resources are considered for dynamic components or for any resources, like these are the like steps always do. So first, I'd always check the official documentation for that particular information, right? So for Angular dynamic components, we have the official Angular documentation site, angular.io/docs, which gives a brief explanation of what dynamic components along with examples and explanation. So that's a pretty good resource to start off with. And as far as any specific problems are considered, where I'm stuck, I'll always go for Google or Stack Overflow. Most of the times, they kind of save our lives, right? And even after that, if you're not able to find a solution for a particular problem, we always have the wonderful community members like Stephen Santosh here in Twitter who will always help us with the problem. So these are the set of steps that I always go through, like to find any solution for a problem.
Thank you, Nivita. So, Stephen, would you like to add something? I mean, this question can be represented in another term. Like, if I have any question related to Angular, how should I get started? I mean,
Yeah. So the when it comes to dynamic components, you have to dig into a little bit about what someone means by dynamic components. If they mean a component that changes, I mean, you can do all that with your kind of Angular template syntax. If you're trying to say a component that is assembled at runtime, kind of this higher order component, that is something that is more challenging because we require the compiler right now. So you can use something like JIT to create a dynamic component. We see a lot of tooling vendors out there doing that. But you could also mean, for example, a dynamically loaded, like a lazy loaded component, where you can actually do this now, where you can, with Ivy and version 9, you can actually load just a component and then apply its module syntax separately or at the same time. But we don't give any official recommendations on this because we're working behind the scenes to try and make all of these APIs simpler and make sense so that when we start pushing this in the world, everyone does it the same way. And so people are kind of waiting on us for best practices, but some of these things are definitely possible now, especially in Ivy.
yeah, thank you, Stephen. Next question is from Ujjwal. Is there any expected date or time of arrival for web stories plugin in WordPress? This question is for Aman.
Okay, thanks for this question. Actually, AMP Web Stories plugin is already available in beta, and you can download it. It's not official on the WordPress plugin store, but you can download it. And I guess there was already a share link that was circulated about that, and I'll be sharing that link again so that you can get that and share it out. Yep.
Thank you, Aman. So let's move on to the next question. And this next question is from Arpan. And his question is, what could be some good alternatives to Angular material? Stephen, for you.
Sure. It's a great question because in general, we build Angular material to be a great manifestation of the material design philosophy from Google, as well as a really great example library that focuses on things like accessibility, internationalizability, all these animations. But we actually have a really great list on our Angular.io website, where if you go to angular.io/resources, you can actually see a list of a whole bunch of UI toolkits. We've got things from like American Express has toolkit. You've got toolkits like Ant Design. You've got toolkits like Bootstrap, Clarity. Ignite has a bunch of UI components. So I would say there are really, really great UI toolkits out there. And there's too many to call out. So I would definitely just take a look at the list on AUIO resources. And I will also say that if you are a component library author out there, we accept PRs. So if you want to be listed on that list and you meet some kind of quality bar in terms of notability and the quality of your implementation, send us a PR and let's get you added to the list as well.
Okay, so the next question is from Lalit. If we write CSS inline, we will end up duplicating CSS in our HTML page. So how you suggest to avoid that? This question is for Hiren.
Okay. Yes. So AMP has a limitation of inline CSS that you can have only 75 KB of CSS in your page. So here, what I would suggest is that if you have such requirement that when you want to have a kind of a global CSS, you can still load it with the AMP script, and you can have it loaded inside your page. But yeah, when you are using AMP pages, you can have a different CSS on the different pages. So this could happen, but still you can do what you can do is that you can load it inside your AMP script page, and you have to make sure that you are not duplicating pages, and you are not duplicating CSS. You just create reusable classes and edit in all other pages. So this is how you can do that, because as we have mentioned that AMP does not allow any external resources or any external CSS files, so you have to use only the inline CSS. So this is how you have to do that. So yeah, there could be a chances that some of your CSS declaration is duplicated, but if you want to use the power of AMP, then this is you have to deal with it. But as I said, maximum 75 KB of CSS is allowed. So this is how you can have a page specific CSS on each page. So yeah, this is what we can do.
Yep. Just to add to this question, Hiren. So in
Yeah.
JavaScript world, we have something called post CSS plugin, right? Which actually tree shakes our CSS. So can we
Yes.
use some plugins like that in maybe in AMP?
Plugin will not be possible, because as we have said that the AMP JS, which is the inbuilt JS for what it does is that it actually eliminate the external resources and does not allow it, because it is, as I said, if something is wrong with the external resources, then it may break your page application, whole page. So it is not allowed. So external plugin will not be possible to use. We just have to use and we just have to go for the inline CSS.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Also, to add on to that, like there is a way to externally load the web, like the CSS that you are doing, by just including the AMP style and then including the external source. And if you
Yes.
are just using the inline head code inside your AMP CSS, and if you validate it, and if it's having duplicates in terms of classes, it will automatically give it as an AMP error. And you cannot use any important tag in the AMP CSS also. So ultimately, you won't have any duplicates at all if it's a valid AMP page.
That's
Yes.
cool. I mean, having important is always painful. Okay. So sorry. Yep. So the next question which we have is from TechBook Can. Can we use AMP with Vue.js or any other front-end framework? I think this question is pretty much similar to what we had earlier. So Aman, would you like to answer this question?
Yep. So AMP directly doesn't support if you want to create 100% AMP valid page, then you cannot have any other JavaScript framework. But there have been use cases where you can use AMP as a component and can include them in different frameworks like Vue.js. Also, there is a very good support with Next.js, and people are creating something called as canonical AMP URL, like a same copy of the same website, also in an AMP version, so that it loads fast in the AMP caches. So this is a way how you can create. This is actually called paired AMP experiences, and a lot of publishers actually use this way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Sorry, thank you for your answer. Question by Saurabh: how to handle perf optimization aptly if there is a dynamic element on the page which is re-rendering at relatively high rate? So this question is for you, Stephen. So
Sure. So generally what I'll say is Angular is very, very fast at doing runtime change detection and performance. So because we have this component tree, because we do a single pass change detection, it should be very, very fast. But if you have a component that maybe you're updating a lot, like the crazy example I was here is I was talking to a large financial company, and they wanted to like show 500 different stocks and re-render the prices every 50 milliseconds, like crazy stuff, right? Like users probably can't even keep up with that. So I'll put the UX concerns aside, but let's say you wanted to do something like that. There's a lot of strategies that you can use. So one would be on push, where you take complete control of which parts of the tree you're change detecting, because the fewer components you have to re-render or update, the faster your application is going to be. You can use things like on push and observables. So you can say, hey, let's asynchronously listen to this, and then we can automatically use that async pipe to mark that component as dirty whenever something emits. So that can allow you to make sure you're not rechecking kind of large parts of the tree if you have to re-render one piece a lot. Another of these strategies is really focusing on the change section, understanding when and where and why it's happening. So listening to the lifecycle events on the component, and then actually looking and saying, is this meeting my needs? That large financial company, they ended up, for their little demo, which was super contrived again, but what they ended up doing was they turned off the kind of automatic change section. And so they ran a bunch of code outside of zones, so it wouldn't trigger change section. And then they were manually marking things, components as dirty and change secting them. So we don't recommend this for most UI developers because it's harder to reason about and control and think about and manage. But you can take like complete control of change section and say, only change check this when I want. And then if you keep your component as finely grained as possible, Angular doesn't have to do very much work to update a string interpolation, for example. So that would be how I would focus on that performance.
Thank you for your answer, Stephen. Okay, so the next question is, our website is loading under 3 seconds. It is made on WordPress CMS. So is it good, or do we need more improvement? Moreover, do we need AMP? I mean, 3 seconds is really fast, but let's hear from the experts. So Aman or Hiren, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I mean, 3 seconds is fast, but what about 1 second? You can also achieve 1 second over there. Why not like squeeze all the performance you have? So actually, not only just the loading speed, but AMP also has one more advantage, that is AMP cache, which is not offered by any other web framework. So if you use the AMP plugin and you have a valid already valid AMP themes or plugins, you just need to install and activate a plugin, and it will be exactly like performing better than the normal website. So I think you should give it a try.
Hiren, you want to add something?
Yeah, what Aman said yeah, does make sense because whenever you can achieve more performance and you can reduce loading time from 3 seconds to 1 second, definitely you should go for that. And as Aman mentioned, there is a ready-made AMP theme available for WordPress, so you can go with that, and definitely it will improve the performance. So you should give it a try.
Thank you. Thanks. Any example of AMP JavaScript? Okay.
Okay, so here question is any example of AMP JavaScript means AMP has two things in terms of JavaScript. One is one as we discussed in the session, that one is the AMP.js, which is the core block of AMP framework, which handles all the things like rendering your HTML tags and streamlining your resources, asynchronous loading, blocking any external resources, and inline CSS and everything. So that is one example. That is the inbuilt JS, which takes care of everything from bootstrapping your bootstrapping for your AMP application and managing the layout and all. Another is the third-party JavaScript, if you are mentioning. So that is also, we have discussed in the session, that you can have AMP script tag and you can load any of your external JavaScript, and inside that you can have your DOM element, which is affected by that particular JavaScript. So this is how you can do that. So if that question refers to that, so yes, this is the two way you can have JavaScript implemented in your AMP web page.
Yep. So I think we are done with the AMA session. I mean, thanks to all the speakers for taking their time and being here. So I am sure you all deserve a huge clap. So can we just have a huge clap for all the speakers and the organizers on our chat, please? So thank you everyone, and hope you enjoyed the session, and we will just end the AMA here now. Thank you.
I and Santosh would like to extend our gratitude to all the speakers and attendees here today. We enjoy contributing to our today's show, and we believe that we enjoy learning. Please fill the feedback form mentioned in the banner.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today. So my daughter wanted to be on live stream, so here she is. Say hi. Yeah. So thank you, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers, all the amazing contents which we saw, especially to Stephen, who actually actually was available at 6 a.m. in the morning to deliver this talk, and we will have some amazing contents for tomorrow and day after tomorrow. So so follow our live follow our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, so you will be updated with whenever we are going live. So see you tomorrow, and please fill up the feedback form so we can improve, and we will come up maybe with some better contents. Whatever you want us to improve, provide your feedbacks. Thank you.